The mediums I work in are unusual. Unusual whether it's watercolor at the scale that I use it or the odd collection of materials I use to paint with. I consider it painting very much. But I didn't want to repeat myself, so a brush is such a sophisticated thing. It's a very refined, evolved tool, a brush. My most recent work has been involved with the use of stencils that I create myself here and with my two wonderful assistants. And they're really based in this case, sycamore bark, pieces of bark that I find when I'm walking the dog down by the river. Our property has both sides of the North Fork of the Roanoke River. And they're beautiful shapes, and I put them on an overhead projector and shoot them on the wall, and I trace them in ink and on acetate and cut them out. And then these are what these piles of plastic are. These are really big ones. And when you lay them over one another, you get interesting designs, and endless variety. So I've been working lately on very, very large paintings. The one I just finished is 8.5 by 25 feet, 6 inches. It's in panels, goes back to use of polyptychs, but the panels are columns of 3 and 4. And I'm currently working on one, which I'm surprised how different it is from the first one. Obviously related, but different. That's going to be 11 feet, 6 inches by 27.5 feet. I don't know where I'll show them. I'm painting them just for myself. They're really too big to go into the moss. I've been working in this direction with patternization that I derive from my own drawings since I began, close to the time that I began working with oil emulsion and powder pigment as my color medium on top of kind of watercolor or water media toned paper. First I'll stain the paper with water and let it puddle up, and it'll have mica powder and things in it, and then I remove the water while it's still standing. It makes patterns. And then sometimes I'll distress the paper by wrinkling it all up before I start painting on it, because I like what those lines do as I begin working with the pigment. Those lines get picked up with dark edges. Some of them are severe folds. Out of that came the interest in doing something with shapedness, and that's where the stencils came from. I go to Kremer in New York, and I play with their powder pigments. Sometimes I even bring some of my little stuff along, like the oil emulsion I have is just paint thinner with a little bit of oil in it, you know. And I'll rub it, and some of it is, even if it's very fine ground, it's still too granulated. It doesn't really dissolve right. But I play with colors and I add them together, and some of them work and look good, and some of them don't. It's completely intuitive otherwise. I've expanded the range of it. The red lends itself to the oil emulsion and being rubbed into it. Certain reds do. I wanted to work monochromatically, and I'd always associate, so much of what I was doing was this Rikyū gray, very grayish atmosphere. So I picked red because I thought it would be a hard color to work with. But then, I did a lot of reds. And it could be very velvety, and it could have a very silky feeling. It went very nicely with my tendency to, once I'm done with something, whether it's on smoked paper or distressed paper or just clear paper that's been water toned, I stretch it over a wooden panel that's been primed 3 times, and it stretches right out. So smoke, where we're throwing the painting repeatedly into the fire, or wrinkling it up, it all smooths out again once it's stretched. And there's no glue involved or anything. It's a very simple process. And to do that, to work on a larger scale in paper, Graves advised me to use wax. So it didn't work with paraffin and things like that because it's an oil petroleum product and it would enter the paper and darken everything. But then I found beeswax would lay right on the surface of it, and if it wasn't molten or too hot, it wouldn't go into the paper. So I could essentially keep the character of what the painting looked like, but put a veneer on it, put a coating of beeswax on it, scrape it off, put it on with a double boiler, scrape it off with a spatula in the sun or on a heat table, or in a red-hot room, as I ridiculously used to do when I started it. I'd get the whole room to be 140 degrees and stand there naked, scraping it off the wall. Now I use a light table with some heat lamps on it. The big square painting is about 2002, is it? Or is it 2009? I'm not, but that's when I was working on distressed paper outside, where I put down the oil emulsion, which is clear, and then when I dust it with graphite and/or pigments, the marks appear. So you don't see the marks until you begin to put that graphite powder and the dried pigment powders down and rubbing them in. And you can control the intensity just by how much you rub them, you know? So here you see how the folded lines make these wonderful striations. I happen to like them. And there's no stencils being used in that. That's just literally working outside, accepting the stimulation of nature all around me, and working with grasses and weeds, and I'm not literally rending them, I'm making things like them. Well, that's what I'm surrounded by when I'm down in the lower meadow, and those things have movement, and there's sound in the river, things like that. What I try to do is push myself in different directions. So in a painting that's on the floor now, I can see what I was doing where I started, and then I can see changes in it, subtle changes where it's feeding off itself. And I'm trying not to get it over with, you know. If I work on 4 or 5 panels a week or something like that, and then I don't do anything for a day, and then that allows things to gestate. When I did the first one, we had smoked the papers all much lighter, the washes. First the paper is toned, puddled, then the paper is smoked, then the paper gets this overall tone on it, the gray tone, light gray here, a darker gray here. That's painted through a synthetic fabric scrim. It's like tulle, like you'd use in a wedding dress, you know? It gets stretched over it, so you get this little pixelated look, but you also get these wonderful white shapes and things because you can stretch and manipulate that tulle to where it breaks up, or it cluts up a little bit, and it leaves all these residual whites. So we've done 4 things to it at this point. I haven't painted, quote, anything on it yet. So we almost have a work of art before I begin making the linear elements. It's a challenge because the smoke, the toning, the washes become so beautiful, you have to think about whether you should touch it or not. But 9 people were out here smoking paper all day, and that's how we got this one. We kept smoking them to make them darker and darker. I want to do one more. I want the gray tone and the smoke, if possible, to be even darker, because I want to work in a very deep range of colors. But smoked paper has become a specialty of Southwest Virginia. I think we could call it Appalachian smoked paper and sell it at Cracker Barrel. I enjoyed teaching in the art department at Virginia Tech because it was an engineering and a science school, and instead of treating me like everybody's cousin or brother-in-law, like if you go to Williams or Haverford or Bucknell, everybody's brother-in-law or somebody is an artist, so they're a dime a dozen. They didn't know what to do with an artist here, so I was treated like another engineer or scientist or researcher. So I began having an inclination to do projects that could contribute something to the tech culture, to the unique nature of the tech culture fairly early on. And anything you did, they needed it. They didn't have much basis in the arts. So I began doing projects that were eventually interdisciplinary projects with sciences and engineering. I think by working with so many other departments and programs on organizing the kind of technical resources we needed for such unique workshops, like in microbiology or some of the programs that we've done had involved me with all of these other disciplines on the campus where there were scientists and engineers and people who didn't associate themselves with the arts. But then after the project would be done, someone like Greg Ferry would say, I think I've taught more biology doing this than I've done in any of my my real big intro classes. The entire Mountain Lake project, beginning with the symposium, which were interdisciplinary theoretical criticism, big criticism conferences, they led to the workshops, and the workshops were working with artists, usually inviting them to do a distinctly different kind of work, where we would organize the technical resource for that work, and they would work with students and community members who were then also the co-creators of that work, or to some degree, at least the collaborators in it. And that turned out to be a very fortunate interdisciplinary collaborative formula. I mean, Cage would come down from Mountain Lake almost every night from where he was staying in the guest house at the Horton studio, and he'd visit students at their desks in Kogel. Yeah, where he got the energy from? Then I'd get up there a little before 8 o'clock in the morning. He'd already be in the studio, and we'd work till 6 p.m. I think it was easier because it was Southwest Virginia and the Appalachians. People have a myth about it, and I think many people haven't been here. So I'm only 8 hours from New York. I always kept a place in Manhattan, and this was like an exotic place. So then you have a big engineering and science and technology school in an exotic place that people associate with Little Abner, and a kind of hillbilly backwoods consciousness, as well as the oldest mountains in the world, where there's a greater variety of wildflowers than any place else in the world. The benefit to the community, I think, was wonderful because we were busy all the time. We were always doing things, and the artists in this situation were interacting with people all the time, and they were doing something new themselves. Like Merle Euclides had never worked in microbiology, Cage had never painted. Howard Finster did his largest collaborative workshop with community with his dimensions. The art world is a pie, and there are slices in it. There's the making of the art, and then the exhibiting of the art, writing about the art, being part of the institutional organization. When you asked earlier what opportunities the students have who are material culture or studio majors, I think lots of opportunities, because the artist has always been a contributor to everything. It's only maybe in the post-avant-garde era where artists maybe seem a bit isolated from society at large, not able to take their place, be at the decision-making table with other people of community stature. Studio art majors tend to do very well by the time they're in midlife. And that doesn't mean they're exactly doing their art or what they majored in. I think it's because they're resourceful and take responsibility for themselves sooner in life. And their expectations are based in the idea that if they don't take care of themselves, nobody is going to take care of them.